The Future of the Past, Digitizing Manuscripts. The Polonsky Foundation, a UK-registered grant-making charity, is dedicated to sharing intellectual resources on a global scale, through in particular helping to digitize millions of pages from ancient texts, to make them freely available online, to researchers and to the general public. In this talk, illustrated by short videos produced by the participating libraries showcasing the richness of their collections, we shall discuss the historic value of the manuscripts and the dramatic increase in accessibility and dissemination of the treasure made possible by the recent partnerships. Such projects usually have manifold objectives, not least the preservation of the manuscripts. However, the following two are also top of the list, and they are to make the manuscripts more accessible for researchers and to look for innovative ways to attract and inspire a broader public by the riches of cultural heritage, thus dissemination and diffusion. The Foundation likes to support collaborations, to bring about knowledge sharing and capacity building, to forge friendships, which together lead to wider collaborations and development of networks and standards within the sector. Crucially, scholarly work accompanies the digitization. When the manuscripts are approached again and are studied in even closer detail, many areas can be elucidated, and they include the production, use, circulation, and replication of manuscripts, iconographic sources, cataloging, conservation, material studies of the manuscripts, establishing the identities of the scribes, shedding light on the circulation of ideas, transnational and transregional connections, and patterns of the transmission of knowledge, and much else, including purchasing new equipment and being able to have dedicated staff to carry out the multifarious tasks involved in assessing the state of the manuscripts, actual digitization, and creating dedicated web resources. The first project that we are going to be looking at is England and France, 700 to 1200, manuscripts from the Bibliothèque National de France and the British Library, Polonsky Foundation Digitization Project. The British Library and the Bibliothèque National de France have worked together to digitize a selection of 800 illuminated manuscripts from the period between 700 and 1200, sharing them online for the first time. The 800 illuminated manuscripts are divided equally either side of the Atlantic. 400 of the manuscripts come from the Bibliothèque Nationale de France and 400 from the British Library. The manuscripts have been selected for their historical significance in terms of relations between France and England during the Middle Ages. They are also of unique artistic, historical, and literary interest. This is a video that provides an insight into the project. It is about 5 minutes long and features presentations from the founder of the Foundation, also from the British Library and Bibliothèque Nationale de France.
The Polonsky Foundation is a charity registered in the UK which focuses on the humanities and preservation of cultural heritage. My father obtained his doctorate at the Sorbonne in the early 50s, benefited greatly from being in Paris, and has a great love for French civilization. So this project, a collaboration between the British Library and the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, was an opportunity for him to express his appreciation.
Le soutien de la Fondation Polonsky a été un déclencheur en fait de ce projet. C'est une institution qui elle-même partage les valeurs qui sont celles de la Bibliothèque Nationale de France et de la British Library, et sans ce soutien financier extrêmement important, nous n'aurions pas pu nous lancer dans un projet d'une telle envergure.
Digitisation is vital for libraries like ours because we have extraordinary treasures, but they're hidden away. Scholars have to come here in person to explore them, and for the general public, they very frequently don't even know they exist. British Library and Bibliothèque Nationale de France, between them, hold probably the greatest collective treasure of medieval manuscripts, but never in all our long history of friendship and partnership have we been able to bring them together like this before. A project like this brings people together across institutions, so by collaborating, by learning from each other, you build the new knowledge and most importantly the new friendships that allow future projects like this to really flourish.
La numérisation des trésors qui sont conservés par la Bibliothèque nationale de France, ça fait partie évidemment des priorités que nous nous sommes données. Il s'agit là d'un fonds exceptionnel de manuscrits du Moyen-Âge et c'est aussi un objectif de travail partagé avec une autre grande institution patrimoniale qui est la Bibliothèque nationale d'Angleterre, la British Library. Nous sommes deux institutions qui avons joué un rôle majeur dans la conservation de nos mémoires et nous partageons une histoire qui se voit dans nos collections. En l'occurrence, les relations entre la France et l'Angleterre, ces collections anglo-normandes qui ont été créées, constituées, écrites entre le 8e et le 13e siècle.
Le programme Polonsky inclut dans l'ensemble de 800 manuscrits, 400 manuscrits pour la Bibliothèque nationale de France et 400 manuscrits pour la British Library. Le programme qui a permis la restauration d'un ensemble de manuscrits à la BNF et à la British Library. À la BNF, nous avons pu faire restaurer 82 manuscrits. Parmi ces manuscrits, 3 étaient particulièrement importants car ils étaient recouverts de lieux précieux.
It's been amazing working on the Polonsky project. Every day I get excited. There's such a beautiful, amazing collection. The items I get to see every day are so beautiful and so amazing. It's such a privilege to be able to work on manuscripts like this.
Les programmes permettent de mieux comprendre les manuscrits inclus dans les corpus, d'écrire leur structure matérielle, leur histoire, l'étude de leur provenance, et leur valeur intellectuelle, identifier les textes qui sont transmis dans les manuscrits, les copistes, les artistes qui ont participé à cette production.
L'apport de la BNF dans le projet Polonsky, c'est la constitution d'un site qui va permettre de consulter à la fois les manuscrits de la British Library et les manuscrits de la BNF en s'appuyant sur le protocole 3IF. Donc 3IF, c'est une norme qui permet d'avoir des images en très haute résolution. Ce que va permettre de faire par exemple 3IF en utilisant le visualiseur Mirador, c'est de comparer les manuscrits. À gauche, on a l'évangile de Metz et à droite, un des documents de la British Library et on voit qu'on peut comparer la structure de ces pages qui se ressemblent.
One of the aspects and goals of the England and France project is to build a new interpretive website, and this will have articles and information aimed at the general public. So we'll have short articles on all different kinds of subjects, such as the relationship between England and France at this period, music, science, law, history. This will include manuscripts from both libraries. Everything will be translated and available both in English and French.
We're delighted with the outcome of the project. It's been tremendous for us to see these two significant institutions collaborating and working together so productively and creatively. It's interesting to see how many ways they have found to make these riches available through exhibitions, a book, a film, and blogs and social media, and very importantly, all of this in 2 languages to signify the collaboration of the institutions and the rich common culture of these 2 nations.
As we have seen, the project has created 2 innovative websites. Using the International Image Interoperability Framework, IIIF, the Bibliothèque Nationale de France hosts a new website, France et Angleterre, Manuscrits médiévaux entre 8e et 3e siècle, that allows side-by-side comparison of 400 manuscripts from each collection, selected for their beauty and interest. This new website allows users to search the manuscripts in English, French, and Italian, and to annotate and download images. The British Library has created a curated bilingual site, Medieval England and France 700 to 1200, for a general audience that features highlights from some of the most important of these manuscripts, It also features articles and videos. Both websites launched in November 2018. The fact that the website launched in 2019 does by no means that the collaboration has come to an end. This partnership has been evolving, not least producing illustrious publications, which also feature highlights. It may sound a little bit too mainstream, the highlights, but they are 400 each, and they're also accompanied by in-depth commentary and very beautiful illustrations. To say beautiful is possibly a little bit simplistic. However, the illuminations are simply beautiful, and they dazzle with their detail. And also when one thinks about all the expertise that went into deciphering the provenance of these manuscripts, and the circulation of these ideas, and how these manuscripts traveled across space and time, these books are very much worth reading, even though the highlight sounds as a little bit populist. Importantly, these manuscripts are also accessible on the British Library's Digitized Manuscripts website, or on the Bibliothèque National de France's website, Balika. In other words, these dedicated websites are incorporated into the more comprehensive websites of the respective libraries. And this is the front page of the French site dedicated to the project. If we enter an item in the advanced search, that will bring us to the viewer. And the following video shall elucidate some of the functionality enabled by the IIIF, or International Image Interoperability Framework functionality.
I will make a very brief presentation of the viewer's main features and qualities. So you access the viewer through the advanced search of the website developed by the BNF. This is a very important thing. The website developed by the BNF is built using all the functionalities of Gallica, or digital library, which means that it evolves on a regular basis, and it's also a very robust environment, and sustainability is one of the issues of every project, as you have to maintain the site for many years. So you can make a search with a place name and involving both collection. Then you access a result list, you choose a manuscript, and if you click on previous, you get back to the result page and you reset the viewer, and when you go to add item, you return to the result page, but you add another document for comparison. So here, for example, you have two manuscripts, one from the British Library, one from the BNF. But more interesting is the fact that you can add up two more manuscripts and see 4 manuscripts at once. The vertical layout is given by default, but you can also show them in an horizontal view. But if you are on, no, I'll have to go back. If you are on a cell phone, you can only access 2 manuscripts. So here you can also see information and metadata. You can view the manuscripts in many ways: image view, book view, scroll view, or gallery. And then you can also download the document, one page or the entire manuscript, in PDF format. And here you have all the possibilities, all what you can do. You can share them, send them by email, Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter. You can annotate them, you can manipulate images, adjust brightness, contrast, rotate, change colors, and you can also crop images. If you crop images, the selected area is limited to 1/3 of the image in order to avoid sharing or saving of the entire image in high definition. You can add a comment on the page. Annotation can be modified, deleted. You can export annotation. They can be saved locally only. The file can be shared, and you can also import them. And then you have a control check that tells you that it has been made, it has happened properly. Images can be cropped, as I told you, and I invite you to browse through the site later on.
This presentation comes from an online seminar that took place on the 27th of October 2020. It was, of course, online, like everything else was last autumn. It was a seminar under the auspices of Consortium of European Research Libraries. It features more than this presentation. Representatives of the various participating libraries came together to present insights onto the project, to present some of the issues with which they had to contend during the pandemic, because a good part of these projects are still ongoing. Some of them are very new, and right at the outset, they had to contend with the fact that some of those codexes, if not all, were not accessible. And I shall make further references to this event. And if one were to have a look at it, it is easy to find on the on the internet. One needs to go into YouTube and then enter the abbreviation for the Consortium of European Research Libraries, Polonsky event, and there will be a whole list of the various presentations, which yet again provide insights onto the process of digitization, including some cataloging issues, provenances, and more. This is the corresponding website at the British Library, and again, it invites us to explore now the 800 fully digitized manuscripts. If we scroll down this page, we shall come to what has been referred to in the video that we saw a few minutes ago. There are featured manuscripts, there are themes, there are highlighted manuscripts, and they are accompanied by expertly written articles and not infrequently videos. Like this, for instance. Under each of these themes, there may be a cluster of materials, not one single article or one single video. So it is most rewarding to try and read more. It really is a very exciting journey into the field of manuscripts. Featured collection items, and here we shall possibly have a look at the Saint-Denis Missal, which is in the bottom left-hand corner. The reason we are doing so is because this is the manuscript that featured in the video that presented this project, which we saw a few minutes ago. This provides a compilation of descriptive entries from the two websites, the British Library and BNF. The complete entries are very capacious, so they could not be introduced here in full detail, simply because it can take half a lifetime to study this manuscript. But again, this is just to show how easy it is to move between the two different websites, how these manuscripts are inter-referenced. And so yes, this is the Missal Sancti Dionysii or Saint-Denis. The codex was made around 1050 in the north of France for the use of the most important abbey of Saint-Denis. The lavish decoration features purple backgrounds, luxurious frames with foliate patterns, as well as numerous full-page images, and the magnificent treasure binding depicting a crucifixion scene on the upper cover. This manuscript was digitized with the support of the Polonsky Foundation. This is a fragment of the description of the item from the British Library online catalogue of digitized manuscripts. If we desire to explore it in more detail, and if indeed we decide to go into the viewer, this is an example of what we might find. It is the same manuscript, and we clicked on just on the cover, and the International Image Interoperability Framework, among the features it enables is deep zoom. So the detail is absolutely exquisite, and we can zoom in even more deeply. I was struck when I was looking at it by how Baroque, incidentally, this part of the cover created in the 11th century looks. It certainly isn't Baroque, but it provides really much food for thought. And the iconography of the cover is, if not derived from Byzantine prototypes, then is strongly influenced. Well, this is a medievalist in me. And of course, one can look at the exquisite gemstones and all the ironwork. And also, if one looks to the bottom of this slide, one sees a whole band with each individual folio catalogued and reproduced digitally, which also can be studied individually in as much detail. It can be yet again downloaded as a PDF, it can be annotated, it can be shared, and much more. A brilliant tool for research and for browsing. The British Library website also features an absolutely brilliant medieval manuscripts blog. This elucidates various manuscripts digitized both through the Polonsky Foundation and not. And this highlights, among other things, that the British Library manuscripts also feature in various exhibitions. Polonsky digitized manuscripts featured in the Anglo-Saxon British exhibition that took place at the British Library 2 years ago and was, of course, very popular and very well attended and informative. The current exhibition, elucidated here, is dedicated to Thomas Becket. The exhibition is held at the British Museum, is entitled Thomas Becket, Murder and the Making of a Saint. It has already opened on the 20th of May. It will run for 3 months and shall close on the 22nd of August. Of course, the manuscripts that are featured are not featured in its digitized form, in their digitized form. However, should anyone feel inclined to explore them more in greater detail, now the resource is available, so one knows where to go to these websites, and there will be the digitally reconstructed images, which can be viewed in greater detail, and especially at the time of the pandemic, when we know things may not be as readily accessible as they once were. This only enhances the importance of digital humanities. And of course, these manuscripts cannot be handled as frequently as we would like to do so. So that again, it simply broadens the access to these manuscripts and reduces the risk of damage to the precious original copies. This manuscript, the featured one, sorry, is the one to the left. It is Thomas Becket in conversation with King Henry II above a genealogical table. The genealogical table looks very much like a support, like a pillar supporting the claim of the king to his throne. He is indeed described as the son of his mother, Queen Matilda. And if we wish, again, to look at it in the viewer, to study it in greater detail. Oh yes, before I forget, the manuscript to the right is indeed digitized through the Polonsky Foundation project, and it is a different manuscript, also searchable through the British Library's digitized manuscript catalogue. However, if you would like to look closer at the Thomas Becket in conversation with King Henry II manuscript, we can go into the viewer, and we find yet again in each folio digitally represented and also magnified to enable close study. As we can see, the illumination, the illuminated initials, the notes in the margins are all kind of available to view in brilliant detail. And also it's quite amazing how easily readable this is. So if we go, the fourth line from the top is something de la bataille, and the mid-section is les rois, and frère du comte. I'm reading it right off the page, but it's, to me personally, it's quite exciting how one is able to read an ancient manuscript of the of a digital resource, which is especially relevant now yet again. The next project is a collaboration between the Bodleian Libraries of the University of Oxford and the Biblioteca Apostolica Vaticana. The joint forces between 2012 and 2017 in a landmark digitization project with the aim of opening up their repositories of ancient texts. More than 1.5 million pages from their remarkable collections have been made freely available online to researchers and to the general public. The initiative was made possible by a £2 million award from the Polonsky Foundation. The digitization project has focused on 3 main groups of texts: Hebrew manuscripts, Greek manuscripts, and incunabula, or 15th century printed books. Incunabula derives from the Latin language. Therefore, there are several ways of pronouncing the words, or mainly 2. The anglicized version will be incunables. These groups were chosen for their scholarly importance and for the strength of their collections in both libraries, and they include both religious and secular texts. An important group of Latin texts in the Vatican Library has also been made available online. This is the front page of the dedicated portion of the Bodleian Library's University of Oxford website. And we see the logo of the project, well, the Polonsky, the Bodleian Libraries, University of Oxford, and Biblioteca Apostolica Vaticana. Incunabula, or incunables, are early printed books, produced before the year 1501. The Latin word, as a matter of fact, meant swaddling clothes, referring directly to the infancy of book production. The Bodleian Library's collection of incunabula is probably the 5th largest in the world, and the largest held by a university library, with over 7,000 volumes and 5,600 distinct editions. In order to provide a close link with the Vatican, the Bodleian has been focusing on digitizing incunabula printed in Italy.
Sir Thomas Bodley, founder of the Bodleian Library, was himself the son of John Bodley, printer and publisher of the Geneva Bible, Puritan printer from the West Country. And Bodley himself clearly had an agenda, a rather Puritan agenda, to gather together the oldest and most important Bibles and religious books that he could find, to provide a kind of core, intellectual core for the Protestant Reformation in England. And although by no means every book here is either religious or Protestant, it certainly has at its base, it has a fundamental belief in the importance of the Bible as the central text of civilization. From the beginning, both the Bodleian Library and the Vatican Library have been public libraries. We tend to think of them both as being rather exclusive to the Vatican. You might think particularly is Catholic and hard to get into. In fact, it has been a public library, open to everybody since the mid-15th century, since the time of Pius II. And the Bodleian Library was known as the public library from the beginning. And both of them, from the start, had an agenda to make texts available. What's so interesting about this particular project is we tend, of course, to think of the Bodleian as being ultimately or originally a Protestant library, and you think of the Vatican as being a Catholic library. Not that either is strictly true, but to bring the same story, the same books, the same agenda together from 2 different perspectives has a certain excitement about it.
In the Middle Ages, people knew their Bible in very different ways than nowadays. So for the laity, who had very little access to biblical manuscript, they knew the Bible, they heard the Bibles in chants, in sermons, they recreated the Bible in processions, for example. They saw images in stained glass windows. Even for the clergy, who had access to biblical manuscript, they never had a naked text of the Bible. It was always mediated through the appearance of a manuscript, through the chant they chanted day and night in monasteries. And now with the new technology, we can actually tap into this understanding and create hyperlinks that will enable us to better understand this web of allusion that exists in the Middle Ages for understanding the Bible. We need to think of manuscripts as a wiki edition in a way. because users reacted to the manuscript. They added elements, they erased elements. They're very active readers. And we can see that nowadays in manuscripts. So you can see images scraped, where readers we didn't want other people to see those images. You can see marginal notations, where readers want to add an element and to enable future readers to gain a better understanding of the text. You can see manicures pointing to interesting stuff. You can see marginal drawings, grotesque images, in ways of readers to engage with the text. And in a way, with the digital technology now, we're going back to a manuscript culture, whereas a manuscript is a communal object. Because if I'll take now a printed book from the Bodleian here and annotate in the margins, it won't go out well. But in the Middle Ages, the idea was that you could annotate a text because you added value to it, which future readers actually took from that and annotated that again. So there's a dialogue of annotations. The digital technology opens new possibilities of, much like in the medieval reality, of annotating text together, of working together, and also of breaking away from the narrative sequence of print. Because in printed books, you have a beginning and you have an end. In some manuscript books, and much like the digital technology, you don't need to do that anymore. You can start at one point and go to the other. You don't need it to be linear anymore. And I think that's an interesting direction of digital technology to take.
We've seen these two presentations that can be found on the website of the Bodleian Libraries, and a slightly longer elucidation of the project is available through the same event, which I mentioned earlier, that took place on the 27th of October 2020, the online seminar under the aegis of the Consortium of European Research Libraries, and can also be viewed on YouTube. And that simply provides a little bit more detail on the various aspects of the digitization of these three main groups of manuscripts involved in that particular project: Greek, Hebrew, and early printing. The next project is also, it also involves the Bodleian Libraries in Oxford. The project is Manuscripts from German-speaking lands, and is a 3-year collaboration between the Bodleian Libraries in Oxford and the Herzog August Bibliothèque in Wolfenbüttel. Funded by the Polonsky Foundation, the project seeks to open up the medieval German manuscript collections of the two world-class libraries for research and reuse. The two libraries will digitize nearly 600 medieval manuscripts of Germanic origin between 2019 and 2021. The Herzog August Bibliothek hosts a significant, and in northern Germany unrivaled, collection of monastic libraries from the late Middle Ages. These holdings form the precious nucleus of the historic collections. This is a part of the websites of the Bodleian University Libraries dedicated to this particular project, Manuscripts from German-speaking lands. Interestingly, that also features a blog. We have mentioned in passing the importance of material studies and in preparation, and also very much that emerges or comes to light when the manuscripts are studied yet again in even closer detail than before, especially if a few centuries had elapsed between the time when last they were looked at in said close detail. And this particular blog elucidates how manuscripts are prepared for digitization. If we go to explore the digitized manuscripts, just click on that tab. This brings us to this next page, which looks really dazzling with the gold background. If we look to the left, we shall notice that the digitized items are searchable by institution, which is the Bodleian Libraries, Herzog August Bibliothek, and two manuscripts from Dombibliothek Hildesheim. And further, it is searchable by religious houses. In the light of this particular project, being able to search by religious houses is of special importance. This is partly because one of the main objectives of this project is to highlight the provenances of the manuscripts. As we said, yes, one of the key objectives is to highlight the origins and provenances of the manuscripts in the collections. The holdings of the Bodleian Library and those of the partner institution, Herzog August Bibliothek, do not come from the same religious houses, but are complementary, as they are structured around large collections from individual monastic houses. As an example, the Bodleian Library's collection of manuscripts from Würzburg is the most coherent collection of 9th century Carolingian manuscripts in the United Kingdom. The history of how these manuscripts found their way to the Bodleian Library also reflects the vicissitudes of history. They found their way to Oxford in the course of the 30 Years' War in the 1630s, and they do come from individual monastic collections as a number of volumes, not so very much like individual codices derived from hither and thither, but they in themselves constitute a mini collection. This is why it's important to identify their provenance, because then it will become possible to reunite or reproduce the original collection, and that in its turn will shed light on the workings of each monastic foundation, of their scriptoria, of how the books may have been copied, also on the previous provenance of those codices, were they produced in that particular monastery, or had they been imported, had they been taken there, and together they weave a very complex history, a tapestry of socio-political, economical ties, because these manuscripts each found their way in a particular collection through a multitude of ways. They didn't travel by themselves. There had been agents that took them from one place to the next. Also, it highlights the influences which impacted the manuscript production in each individual house. So establishing a provenance is opens a gate to a whole new area of study, which directly impacts on our understanding of medieval history and intercultural connection and transmission of ideas and as well material knowledge. Yes, I will also observe that if we look at the very bottom of this page, we see just how many pages there are, and then all the manuscripts have now been digitized and all are available for further study. If we do decide to view them closer and go to the viewer, we also find each of the folios digitally reproduced, and this particular one is folio 1 verso, and it is highlighted in the menu to the left, so we know we can keep track of which of the folios we are interrogating at this particular moment. In addition, at the bottom of the page, on the right-hand side, we see highlighted the area which has been magnified. And yet again, one can only marvel at the exquisite detail. And even if one is not specifically a scholar of manuscripts, simply to look and focus on entangling the scroll work, well, I find it fascinating. So one of the websites associated with the ever-evolving and unfolding field of manuscript studies is Material Evidence in Incunabula. This is a site under the auspices of the Consortium of European Research Libraries, which we have mentioned earlier in connection with the online seminar, which brought together many of the participants of the various collaborations under the Polonsky Foundation initiative. What this site does, I shall possibly just read what it says, that every item of data is recorded, a certain style of decoration or binding, the date of a manuscript note, etc., is treated as a valuable clue for provenance. Therefore, it can be geographically located and chronologically dated. This enables to track the movement of books across Europe and through the centuries, just what we said a few moments ago. So the spatial and temporal dimensions all become not so much entangled that they come together and enable us to reconstruct or try and reconstruct the unfolding of medieval history across time and space. This manuscript was also elucidated in the course of said seminar. Now I hasten to add that all my knowledge about these various initiatives does not derive from this seminar, but I thought while we are trying to understand the scope of this initiative, and also if you want to, well, maybe gain a little bit more of an understanding of how the digitization process works and what other knowledge can be derived in the process, then it is simply a good idea to maybe follow up this rather brief presentation with more in-depth researches and considerations which are delivered firsthand by people and scholars, librarians who are directly involved with the project and know it from within. Our next project for discussion is based in Cambridge. So Cambridge and Heidelberg announced, well, they have already announced a major project to digitize treasured medieval manuscripts. Centuries-old manuscripts feature the works of Plato, Aristotle, Sophocles, and Euripides. In a major collaboration announced in March 2019, Cambridge University Library, 12 Cambridge colleges, the Fitzwilliam Museum, Heidelberg University Library, and the Vatican Library have come together as a part of a 2-year, $1 million project funded by the Polonsky Foundation to digitize more than 800 medieval manuscripts. Apart from having the opportunity to digitize these treasured manuscripts, for Cambridge, this is also a major departure because it brings together the various educational institutions scattered throughout Cambridge. Yet again, it includes Cambridge University Library, 12 Cambridge colleges, the Fitzwilliam Museum, all bringing together their resources and combining their forces in order to digitize these precious manuscripts. On the other hand, the Heidelberg University Library and the Vatican Library also have long historical connections. So here we see a partnership within a partnership coming together, forging a friendship and indeed a network. Hundreds of medieval and early modern Greek manuscripts, including classical texts and some of the most important treatises on religion, mathematics, history, drama, and philosophy, are to be digitized and made available to anyone with access to the internet. In the words of Dr. Susanna Paul, people of rare books and early manuscripts from Cambridge University Library, the Cambridge and Heidelberg collections bear witness to the enduring legacy of Greek culture, classical and Byzantine, and the lasting importance of Greek scholarship. The works of Homer and Plato were copied and recopied throughout the medieval period, and the early biblical and liturgical manuscripts are profoundly important for our understanding of a Christian culture based on the written word. These multilingual, multicultural, multifarious works that cross borders, disciplines, and the centuries testify to a deep scholarly engagement with Greek texts and Greek culture that both universities are committed to upholding.
One of the most interesting things that we've been doing in special collections in the University Library over the past couple of years is the Polonsky Foundation Greek Manuscripts project. So this is a project funded by the Polonsky Foundation to catalogue, conserve and digitise all the Greek manuscripts in Cambridge. And that includes over 400 manuscripts, not just in the University Library, but in the Fitzwilliam Museum and in 12 of the colleges. As you can imagine, this is quite a logistical operation involving a lot of help and goodwill from librarians, photographers and conservators across Cambridge, all working together.
When the Greek manuscript arrives in conservation, the first thing we do is conduct a survey. The survey ascertains the condition of the manuscript and takes note of all the structural features. The conservation treatments focus on minimal intervention. We also use like-for-like materials. This means that on skin-based materials, we use protein-based adhesives, and on paper-based materials, we use starch-based adhesives. The specific treatments that we will be conducting to CUL MS NN236 are pigment consolidation, end band consolidation, leather consolidation, and reattachment of a loose folio. Here at Cambridge University Library, conservation work very closely with the photography department, especially on our most vulnerable manuscripts. During our survey, we produced detailed handling information for our colleagues in photography.
Here at the Digital Content Unit, we follow a specific imaging protocol in order to provide high-quality images that can be consistent over the time. This is made possible by the excellent equipment available to us. I'm working with a Phase 1 digital back and a Schneider lens, plus a specially made conservation cradle. This book cradle allows the photographer to take pictures in the best way without damaging the book. It's actually a much easier process in practice rather than in words, and once you get used to it, it becomes something quite natural. We first take pictures of all rectos, then we rotate the book and do the same for versos, and finally we do the spine of the book. Between each page we use a black background so that all details of the page are visible. This is the last part of the process in the DCU, and after that I can return the book to my colleagues of the cataloguing team.
In cataloguing, we're trying to make the information that a manuscript has to offer readily available but to researchers and to a wider public by drawing together and presenting in an organised form which highlights the distinctive features of a manuscript and makes it possible for those seeking information, whether on texts or the physical development of the production of manuscripts and their history, to actually identify and find the material they're looking for. When I get the manuscript, the first thing I'll do will be to check some of the basic physical details, such as the dimensions, the types of material, the number of folios, the way that they're numbered and any anomalies there, and check the basic information which has been recorded by other cataloguers in the past. Typically, I'll then go on to look in more detail at the physical construction of the manuscript, particularly the structure of quires, the small booklets formed of a series of sheets of parchment or paper folded together, on which the text would be copied and which would then be stitched together and bound to form the full book. Typically in a Greek manuscript, each quire is made up of a set of 8 folios.
So projects like this make a real difference. Not only do they enable us to collaborate with colleagues across Cambridge and in libraries in other parts of the world, so that we can share our skills and expertise, but they also help us to bring our collections to the world.
The blog of this particular collaboration is also fascinating, and it focuses, as we have seen from the presentation, on, well, not exclusively, but to a large extent, on the conservation side of digitization. Also, in a fascinating insight, we can find an entry entitled "When a Greek manuscript is German." which fits nicely into our previous discourse on how manuscripts from German-speaking lands traveled across the centuries and across various countries. Also, digitization of Greek manuscripts, a reflection on digital technologies and collective memory. Here, someone who was able to join the project for the digital content unit team also highlights the new opportunities which additional funding affords to various participating manuscripts. Like we mentioned before, one can now one can have more dedicated staff and provide greater technical expertise, all for the cause of digitizing these ancient codices across the different collections. This presentation bears on this collaboration, but also from the Heidelberg side of the project, and that dwells a little bit in a greater detail on the technical side of the matter, how the various metadata and different protocols, different manifests that feed into the databases have been shared between participating institutions. I personally found it fascinating. Unfortunately, we cannot discuss everything here, which is why I encourage you to go and listen and explore it even more. Here is another seminar that was held recently, Greek manuscripts in Cambridge libraries, an insight into the Polonsky Foundation Greek manuscripts. It is 1 hour long. So here there is also much food for thought. Our next project is the digitization of the incunabula of monastic libraries in Italy, the Polonsky Foundation's project with BNCR, which is Biblioteca Nazionale Centrale di Roma, and the Consortium of European Research Libraries. If we look at the bottom paragraph of this text, we shall learn that the project took as its starting point the 11 libraries which belong to the so-called category of Monumenti Nazionali, which comprises the suppressed abbeys and monasteries taken over by the Italian state at the end of the 19th century, following the laws of expropriation and now overseen by the Ministry of Cultural Affairs and Tourism. So, the program, this partnership, is hoping to look at 11 libraries. However, at the moment, the starting point and the pilot project is the monastery of Santa Scholastica in Subiaco, which will be will be digitizing and cataloging its 206 incunabula. If we look further, we shall look further at the short video that is featured in a specially developed, dedicated website, and that explains a little bit more about the suppression of the abbeys and how they were taken over by the Italian state and how now they are overseen by the Ministry of Cultural Affairs and their life in contemporary Italy. If we now, well, this project is also discussed on the website of Biblioteca Nacionale Centrale di Roma, which also highlights the fact that these libraries are attached to abbeys and monasteries of great age and historical relevance. To bring it in line with our previous discussion on the importance of the material study of these manuscripts and of their provenances and how important it is for us to be able to reconstruct the history of medieval Europe, we can reflect on this highlighted section of this page. The research model guiding the project looks at multiple aspects of the 15th century books which are its object, as material artifacts and as texts. And not only the books in themselves, but all the documents which relate to them and to the collections where they are found, catalogues and inventories, manuscripts, copies used as copy texts for printed editions, archival records, and more. Now we are on the dedicated website from which we have seen the video, a history all in the pages of books. These are the 11 National Library monuments which the project ultimately hopes to digitize. The first one, which is the manuscripts that are which are being digitized at the moment, are the Monastery of Santa Scholastica in Subiaco in the top left-hand corner. The other National Library monuments are discussed in fine detail on this dedicated website. This is the Monastery of Santa Scholastica in Subiaco. And the reason why this particular monastery has been chosen for the pilot project is the fact that it's the only monastic center founded by Benedict, which survived the Saracen incursions, and also is the monastery which was the site of the first printing press and production in Italy. So it is doubly important. I would also like to reflect on the fact that the Polonsky Foundation is evolving in that initially, at the start and its inception, it looked at the major collections like the British Library or the Bibliothèque National de France, or the Bodleian Libraries, the Vatican Libraries. Then it started to address more topical concerns. And now it's looking, in this particular project, at wonderful, illustrious collections, but which are slightly smaller and even physically are more difficult to access. They are located in remote monasteries and somehow had not been highlighted as a major subject of research until recently, but they are absolutely valuable or invaluable collections. And again, that highlights how manuscript study as such, as a field, is also evolving and is bringing into the fold of its various research instruments the digital humanities, and digitization of manuscripts forms an absolutely inevitable part of such projects, because to be able to apply any of the further instruments of digital humanities, we have to be able to look at something, and digitization thus is a very important first step. So this is a further glance at the Santa Scholastica, our pilot project, the absolutely fascinating view set in the mountains, the reading room. If we choose to explore the collection, we don't need to even enter any particular item. We can simply click on Explore the Collection, and this will take us to this page, 265 results found. And if we again choose a manuscript to explore or to interrogate, we shall see the following. If we further click on the landscape image in the right-hand corner at the bottom. That will take us to a further page with each folio digitized, digitally represented. Information about these manuscripts are entered into a variety of databases, all connected in order to provide a comprehensive overview of the folios and their provenances. These databases, or some of the databases are: the first one is online public access catalog. Next is Incunabula short title catalog. The next one is the one that we have seen already a little bit earlier, material evidence in Incunabula. And the next, text in Incunabula. So they are all connected, they are linked, and the information about these manuscripts from the various projects is also entered into these various databases. This is the complete presentation, which, as we can see, is rather long, 18.5 minutes long. And I would encourage you to view it, because within it there are more videos as well, and more detail on the process of digitizing these fascinating manuscripts from the remote monasteries of Italy. Our last project, just a second. Our last project to be discussed today is Dante 1481. 1481 is the date of the manuscript. It's an illustrated copy census of Dante Commedia, produced in Florence in 1481, with engravings by Botticelli. Sorry, I've been talking for too long. So why is this particular edition so important that a whole project is dedicated to it? Before we proceed, I must note that 2021 marks the 700th anniversary of Dante's death and the 540th anniversary of the edition's publication. This manuscript, Dante's Commedia, published in 1481, was presented as a gift to the Signoria and to Lorenzo Medici, Lorenzo the Magnificent. Lorenzo the Magnificent was a key figure in consolidating the artistic and civic identity of Florence and of the Republic of Florence. Renowned for his patronage of arts, he presided over the golden age of Florence and over the period of high Renaissance in Florence. I'm not saying not entirely, but playing a very important role in orchestrating the high Renaissance in Florence. Artists such as Michelangelo and Botticelli worked at his court. When he was not commissioning outstanding works himself, he was facilitating such commissions through other agents in Florence. And overall, he was a very important character, not only in the Republic of Florence, but on the Italian scene, trying to broker peace between the various Italian polities at the time. Many sought to overthrow him. That only goes to cement his brilliance as a statesman and as a patron of arts. Dante, at the same time, was one of the most illustrious sons of Florence. He was exiled, and he died in exile. But his everlasting love of Florence found its expression in the narrative of exile, which is very palpable in much of his work. And of course, he produced a very famous work, the Commedia, the Divine Comedy. The attribute divine was attached to it later by Boccaccio. He was one of the greatest scholars in Italy, and in the process of consolidating the identity of Florence, he was one of the very important assets. Also, importantly, he wrote in the vernacular. He wrote his Commedia in the vernacular. He championed the vernacular, the Tuscan dialect, which initiative was also followed by Boccaccio, by Petrarca, and eventually led to the standardization of the Italian language. At the time, of course, many works were written in Latin, and Dante championed the cause of his dialect, of the Florentine dialect. In some of his works, famously, one of these works is Divulgare Eloquentia, on the vernacular eloquence, where he yet again elucidates the richness and the virtues of the native language and tries to exalt its virtues in capturing the sentiment which needs to be expressed in a literary work, and that it can possibly be best expressed in the mother tongue, and that however illustrious the Latin language is for work in scholastica and generally in literary, in letters, that it cannot surpass the vernacular. The edition of 1881, which was presented to Lorenzo the Magnificent, also emerged in the early years of printing in Italy. And it was the first edition of Dante's work that emerged from Florence. It was also supplied with an in-depth commentary by Landino, who himself was a scholar. He lectured on the work of Dante, and it is a very good and in-depth exposition of the entire Commedia, and in itself is an interesting work, and which enhances this edition of 1481. Further, it was meant to be an illustrated edition, and the illustrations were commissioned to Botticelli, who was one of the artists working at Lorenzo the Magnificent's court. Unfortunately, it was never completed, this work. Only 19 illustrations in any given copy of this edition have been printed. However, the initial idea was illustrious, and yet again it was presented to Lorenzo the Magnificent in the Signoria, and the opening proem, the prefatory note, was exalting the virtues of the Medici family, the accomplishments of Florence, and the citizens of Florence. Here in this illustration, Dante is presented in his two most important hypostases from the point of view of a Florentine. He is presenting his work to the city of Florence. All this together made the 1841 publication an outstanding work, 156, a work of outstanding significance. 156 copies survive to this day, and in an online event that was held by the Italian Institute in London and organized by a number of illustrious institutions, which are possibly all familiar to us, and they include the University College London, the University of Oxford, the Bodleian Libraries, and the European Consortium for Research Libraries. So in this event, it was elucidated what this project is hoping to achieve. Let me repeat to consolidate our newly gained knowledge. So the 1481 edition of Dante's La Commedia was printed in Florence with commentary by Cristoforo Landino. The commentary, written in the vernacular, covers the entire La Commedia. It is dedicated to the Medici, and the opening proem celebrates Florence, the accomplishments of its citizens, and the return of Dante to its patria from exile. It was a virtual return because Dante never did return. He died and was buried in Ravenna. But in his mind, he remained staunchly a Florentine, and Florence was his abiding love, and he never ceased to love Florence. 156 copies are known to exist around the world. Each copy has developed its own unique history and provenance, as the books have spread across Europe and beyond, across the Atlantic, in the 440 years since they were first printed. It will be a collaborative project in many libraries worldwide, coordinated by the Consortium for European Research Libraries, to enhance the understanding of an iconic work of literature in their collections by setting it in its historic context, and to explain its impact and reception with the support of a clear and effective narrative and compelling digital resources. It also will be captured in the international database Material Evidence in Incunabula, which we discussed before. It will be further elucidated in the Provenance Digital Archive website, and the innovative way books are catalogued in Material Evidence in Incunabula site, whereby every former owner is tagged geographically and chronologically, will allow us to present the circulation of these copies of Dante on a map from Florence to wherever they are today. This illustration is not from the 1481 edition, already because it is a manuscript and not a printed copy. But much like Dante was guided by Virgil, out of darkness into greater understanding of himself and generally into greater light, the light of knowledge. So I hope our discussion today will help to guide us through the study of manuscripts into a greater understanding of the medieval manuscript culture and a better understanding of ourselves and the world around us. Thank you very much for your attention, and please have a wonderful day.